2014 was the beginning of when I started to watch anime in earnest. All 2014 was the first season that I remember watching from start to finish weekly. I was a fledgling anime fan who was just beginning his descent into the abyss that is seasonal anime. It wouldn't be until 2015 when it consumed me whole, but now a decade has passed since all of that began. And so with that, I wanted to return to some old favorites and fill in some empty holes in my repertoire by watching or rewatching the two most highly rated anime from each season on my anime list. I'm excluding second seasons and Haikyuu, the latter because I have made several videos on it and I think it's abundantly clear that I think it is the best piece of art created by human hands. I chose the most highly rated because I want to see if some of these have become classics or just another anime that time to move on from. So without further ado, let's begin with Winter 2014. Noragami was one of the early anime I watched. It seemed so intriguing and was such a blast to watch. Since my first watch, the series has concluded, and yet we've never seen a season 3. But a normal story, unfortunately, for all too many anime series from this time, and especially of a couple of things on this video. From Winter 2014 alone, we're still waiting on another Nisekoi season, and when you add on all the other seasons of 2014, I'm still waiting on more Baby Steps, Nozaki-kun, and actually good adaptations of Tokyo Ghoul and Aoharu Ride. But back to the series at hand, I was very excited to return to Noragami. It's one of the many anime that I remember being very good, but haven't watched recently enough to confirm or deny that fact. So I was eager to reassess the series basically a decade later. And let me tell you, Noragami holds up incredibly well. The lovable banter of the cast is such a blessing, and the main arc of the season is painful in the best way possible. I didn't remember how gut-wrenching Yukine's purification was, and honestly the whole lead up into the execution of it was masterfully done. It's hard to watch Yukine struggle and the indirect hurt it causes the people around him, but it hurts even more to see the purification that is just eroding his being as he's forced to grapple with himself. Ultimately, his problems are emblematic of a kid his age, but it doesn't make it less unbearable to watch him go through all that. But it's also so refreshing to see Yato accept that and bear the burden of it as well. He suffers because he has formed a bond with Yukine, and their bond is what I remember the most from the series as time has gone by. It's a complicated relationship, but they try to make it all work as they both grow as people. It's impressive how well it's executed that it feels so natural to watch the story progress throughout the fragmenting of their relationship until it eventually boils to a point where action is needed. It made me remember very well how much I loved this series and how much I still want a season 3, even if I don't think we're going to get one anytime soon. My only complaint is that some of the humor has gotten a bit outdated, but honestly that's a pretty reoccurring theme for too many of the series I'm talking about here. Speaking of outdated humor, Space Dandy is an interesting series. It's one I've always heard about from Sakuga threads or discussions of some of the best anime of the 2010s. I've just never gotten around to it for one reason or another. And to Space Dandy's credit, it lives up to the former, but not the latter. The animation of Space Dandy is truly a sight to behold. It's one of the rare series where every member is just firing on every cylinder possible with all the creative freedom to do whatever they want to do it, however they want to do it. It's something that really only exists in brief glimpses since most anime now are just adaptations of one thing or another. And as much as I don't vibe with Dandy as a character, I have to respect that a show like Space Dandy exists. It's a bundle of big name talent set free to do whatever they want. As for the actual episodes themselves, they were hit or miss plot-wise. Some were joyrides through fantastical planets, and some were just kind of okay. Dandy is definitely one of the characters of all time, but it's a good vehicle for a plot of just going wherever whimsy strikes. It's not that deep, but the series uses his free-spirited nature to explore the things the directors are interested in. And the board of talent in Space Dandy is so impressive. There's people like Sayo Yamamoto, Yoko Kanno, Natsume Shingo, Shinichiro Watanabe, and the list goes on. The closest comparison I've made is that Space Dandy is basically the progenitor of a show like Sunny Boy, where the biggest names in the industry are gathered together to just let loose and show their stuff. While I like Sunny Boy a bit more, I'm glad that series like these exist where people can just do whatever they want and really show just what they're capable of to the world. I've followed competitive Smash Bros for over a decade, and they always cited Ping Pong the Animation as their favorite anime of all time, and it makes so much sense now. I'm already a big Taiyo Matsumoto fan from Tokyo these days, but I was blown away by Ping Pong. Every aspect of the production feeds beautifully to each other and are compounded by an incredible story. The character dynamics are absolutely incredible as these people feed off of each other to grow and realize where they belong in life. But it's always nice when they always make sure to remind you that sports should be fun. You can't truly enjoy a sport unless you're having fun, and every character finding their own relationship with ping pong and the people around them is so masterfully woven into that. I expect nothing less of Taiyo Matsumoto. I particularly love the Smile and Peko match because good god, nothing brings me more joy than seeing two friends having the time of their life playing a sport they enjoy. And it hits even harder, especially after Peko's rebirth and the rediscovery of his love for ping pong. I do not say this lightly, but I would put it in the same caliber saying like Haikyuu for sports stories, which if you know anything is the highest praise a story can get. Do not write off Ping Pong the animation for the art style. You are doing yourself a big disservice of your life. No Game No Life is the most 2014 an anime can be. However, it was a series I wanted to rewatch because I love No Game No Life 0, and I was sure I liked it more than the main series, but I wanted to make sure of that fact. And that still holds true. No Game No Life proper is an insane series in too many ways. To give the best possible example, let me talk about a certain moment in episode 5. The scene is after Steph has been degraded all day, Sora and Shira finally compliment her on keeping humanity alive. And it's supposed to be this wholesome moment where they're like, wow, we do respect you as a human being, Steph. But then you realize Steph is as close to nude as the ratings will let her be. She is basically just in a cloth that is covering her extremities. And after all of this, they just leave her stuck in the public square in the basically same nude state, with the whole town just looking on as they just scamper away to go be little gremlins that they are. The point one to glean from this is that Stephanie Dolo is probably one of the most degraded characters in anime, or maybe even fiction ever. She is the butt of basically every moment. She constantly has her clothes removed or her mind altered or is just killed. And any important moment she has in the series is undercut by the fact that she's basically naked during it. It's kind of sad to watch her go through all of that while Sora and Shira just kind of let it all happen or are the active instigators of it. But really, No Game No Life is just an incredibly horny series, often to its detriment. The fan service is the butt of many jokes, but it is so frequent that it feels like it's overstayed its welcome way too often. For every good moment of the series, I also can't recommend it because it comes with some very strange fan service. The fact that the final game is just Akiba's trip of an FPS undercuts how seriously you want to take the skills of the world. There's some interesting moments in the series, and some of the game's evolutions under the system are really neat and fun, but then you counterbalance it with Steph being publicly humiliated for an entire episode as she just becomes less and less clothed, and you're just like, wow, how is this series real? I do still want a second season just to see where it goes, but I do not know how this level of horny would go over in the current year. But maybe that'd be the biggest strength for it, you know, if the Gooners catch on, maybe it'll be a hit again. Originally I had No Game No Life at a 7 out of 10, and honestly, that's an apt place to put it. It's a fun enough series when it wants to be. The maneuvering of the games is consistently engaging to watch. However, the fan service definitely hampers its ability to rise to greatness, and it's also why I think more people should watch No Game No Life 0. There is still fan service in that, but it's definitely degrees of magnitude smaller than the near constant injections of it in the series proper. The whole premise is pretty similar too, since it's about humanity using their weakness to upset the power balance of the world. The core messages are similar, but Zero is a much more approachable watch and a much more easier recommendation from me. No Game No Life proper is a series that is very much a your mileage may vary, depending on how grating you find the fan service, or if you find it exciting and you just like that stuff. But it's not a truly awful series, it's just a bit insane that it exists in the state that it does. I have to give Yoko Kanno credit because I already view the OST as Zankyou no Terror as my favorite anime OST of all time, and upon rewatching it, only further solidified that fact. For all my complaints about the series, the music is most certainly not one of them. But man, Shinichiro Watanabe, you have made two of the most frustrating female characters, but somehow did it for entirely different reasons. Lisa feels entirely useless in the series except as a thing to get tossed around to push the plot around. It never feels like she's the key instrument to any aspect of the series and is really only there to make it harder for 9 and 12 to do their thing. And yet somehow she is less bad than 5, who is a character that defies logic in every capacity possible. Her entrance into the story changes the dynamic in a way that I don't think was necessary at all. 9 and 12 versus Shibazaki would have made a good enough series, but adding 5 makes it impossible to like her for many reasons. First of all, she is more of a terrorist than 9 and 12, considering she pays no regard to the human sacrifice in every instance possible in favor of her little game. If Sphinx had not stopped the airport bomb, she would have actually committed a larger act of terror than they had in the entire series. Every move she makes is at the direct expense of the Japanese government, and yet somehow the series expects us to just go along with her message and not question it. They remark how defensive or weak the Japanese government is in the story, but I would hope they're not weak enough to just let a foreign agent commit acts of terror in the name of catching a separate terrorist group that hasn't actually committed any murders yet. Her actions make no sense, and how they are allowed to happen makes even less sense. And then once the series decides it's time to end, she is told to stop and then is just killed. It's frustrating to watch her enter and exit the series because she adds nothing of value besides being a child playing a game, but has the power to kill hundreds of thousands of people flippantly at her disposal. She's unchecked in the name of making the series more interesting, but it just makes it more frustrating. However, at the end of it all, the series is still engaging, even despite her antics. I love watching the mystery unravel, and the extra direction and tension of the series works. Watanabe can direct and even knows how to do it well. He just needed a lot longer in the writer's room. Because ultimately, I do still like Zankyou no Terror, but I can see so many ways it could have been much better. But none of these include changing the music. Yoko Kanno, I will always love your score for this series, even if the series is not the greatest. Barakamon was the first anime of this adventure to have already been a 10 out of 10 in my eyes. I don't know when I actually watched it first, but I remember loving the comfy and funny vibes of the series, and it absolutely is not faded with time. Barakamon is hilarious, but also oodles of fun. Naru was such a blessing for the show, and is able to keep the series at a fun and easygoing level, while also somehow being involved in a good chunk of the series' most emotional moments. Honda is also such a fun protagonist, while also being a very relatable one. His struggle to find his own voice through his art is a very easily relatable feeling. I think I found more of myself in him when I was younger, but I can absolutely still relate to his struggles now. I too have no idea what makes my own style, but I also just want to struggle towards finding one like he does. For every effortlessly funny joke, Barakamon strikes me deep in my core and asks me why I'm an artist. I'm a lover of any and all series that deal with art and creating art, so naturally my love for Barakamon never faded. It was a 10 out of 10 when I first watched it, and it's still a 10 out of 10 today. Your Lie in April was probably the first anime I ever gave a 10 out of 10. It was my first real foray into anime that made me cry and really sit with my emotions, and as an angsty teenager who was going through way too much, it was a needed dose of emotion. I watched it a good handful of times and then read it a couple more to really sit with it, but then Origairuzoku came into my life and then actually changed my life. And in turn, Your Lie in April fell a bit to the wayside until I decided to rewatch it for this video. In my incessant need to constantly be experiencing new art, Your Lie in April was the biggest reminder that sometimes going back to an old favorite can hit just the same. Rewatching Your Lie in April moved me in a way I did not expect. I knew all the twists going in, but I found resonance in the musical aspect of the story that I never really appreciated in the past. Before, I mostly just loved it from the emotional storytelling, but this time it was the character work and artistic expression through the music that moved me. Kori Miyazono is many things, but her impact on Kosei and the ripples that it has done for so many other characters in the series sets her apart from the other girls that die at the end. Kosei turning music into this form of catharsis and emotional expression moved me because that's what art's all about. Taking the stage, the page, the screen, etc., all in service of confronting ourselves and our emotions. None of the times Kosei takes the stage are easy for him, but he leaves them profoundly changed. They let his competitive spirit be ignited, help him grieve his mother, and help him send off the girl he loved. He lays himself bare before the piano, and it's so moving to experience that. And the ripples that has on characters like Aiza and Emi are so great because they're both affected by Kosei's change in different ways, but both ultimately become better pianists and humans because of it. It changes the typical girl dies at the end story and gives it an expanse. It's not just the main guy who has changed, but he in turn changes others and the girl who dies at the end. Kori would have been dead a lot earlier in the series, but her effect on Kosei doubles back to her to get her to push just as hard as she can, even if she still dies at the end of the series. Where Your Lie in April moved me most was through all of this and taking the time to reflect on it in my own life. When I was in college writing a lot more creative nonfiction than I do now, the most common feedback I would receive was that it was very raw. The emotions were intense and no holds were barred. I had never had a means of self-expression like that in my life, so all of the issues in my life came boiling up and were released onto the page. Some of my strongest writing happened there because I was just laying myself bare through my art. Your Lie in April made me want to write like that again, to really delve into myself and take myself apart on the stage and then reassemble it in a nice form. It made me want to go back to being raw, made me want to tell emotional stories again. I resonate with stories very easily because I'm always trying to find ways to connect with them and with myself. And there are several anime that have influenced that, particularly Origairu. I've written dozens of pages of material dissecting my life through the lens of that series and have always been trying to make it in a way that helped me process it. I processed an awful high school experience with that series, and through it I laid myself bare to tell my story, and one day I'll be able to articulate it in a way the world can see and I can be happy with. But in the end, this series spent way too long trying to give Tsubaki a chance when she did not have a chance in hell of Kosei loving her, and sometimes you gotta give up when there's a girl dying and a boy trying to find himself. I wish her the best of luck, but kicking the shit out of the boy you love is not a healthy expression of your feelings. Please stop doing that. And lastly, there's Parasyte The Maxim, which was my first foray into the more philosophical territories of anime, and Parasyte is rife with them. Based on a manga from the 90s, there's a distinct age to the series, but not in a negative way. It definitely doesn't feel like an anime of 2014, let alone an anime of the current year. Dropping this against any of the other anime in this video gives a very distinct separation, but one that is more than welcome. 10 years later, Parasyte still holds up, but also still suffers from a lot of the same problems I had with it initially. Thematically, Parasyte is very interesting and left me thinking hard about myself and my place on this earth. I exist alongside so many species of life that are somehow all existing on this planet we call Earth. Parasyte argues repeatedly that the parasites are not simply evil beings put on Earth to kill, although several characters try to make that argument. Parasyte doesn't end the story with Shinichi murdering every single parasite. There's ample time dedicated to letting the viewer know that the parasites are still out and about. They are very much still alive when the series concludes. They just adapted to their new environment and sought coexistence, which is the main point that Parasyte makes. Every time the balance is struck, countless people are murdered, in lesser quantities until the raid scene makes this point abundantly clear. The strike team killing human and parasite alike is the most blunt example possible of telling the viewer that humans are capable of just as much evil as the parasites. Whether we choose to act on that evil is the question and the deciding factor that separates the monsters from the humans. For all of Parasyte's thematic quandaries and dilemmas, I only really had one problem with them, which is that they were hammered down a bit too many times. I'm a proponent of the subtlety is for cowards, but even I was starting to get tired of Mirando's character being basically just questioning Shinichi's humanity. It's definitely something that bears repeating and questioning at certain points of the story, considering Shinichi does start walking the line a lot during the series, but I felt like we were reminded more times than were necessary. I'm well aware Shinichi becomes a bit crazy during the midpoint of the series, but I'm also aware he's going to get back on the more or less straight and narrow by the end. As a protagonist, Shinichi is profoundly human. He grapples with his existence and his place in the world while also grappling with the ethics unique to being a guy with a parasite in his arm. The final few episodes are really where Parasyte starts to hit its stride with answering the questions it sets up. I particularly like how the series deals with Goto's defeat and is probably the best summation of the series and what it wants the viewer to think about. And Parasyte is a series that is full of things to think about, and I really enjoyed thinking about them, even if I still have a few problems with it. But the OST is not one of them. It goes unbelievably hard. I started this video with the idea of revisiting the past, filling in gaps of series I hadn't yet seen, and refreshing myself on those I had. I'd already seen a good portion of the series I watched for this video, but I am an entirely different person than I was a decade ago. Some series I had moved my memories of them to the recesses of my mind, and others I felt were fading but still existed. And with a good chunk of the series, I was reawakened with a more mature mind and one that can put his feelings into more concrete words. I can put into words just how bizarre No Game No Life is in 2014, and even more so now in 2024. I can put into words my love for Your Lie in April and how it's developed and changed since I watched it the last time. 2015 began where I got really sucked into seasonal anime and I didn't spend as much time rewatching favorites unless it was named Noragami. But now that I've slowed down my seasonal anime watching, I can look back on the anime of the past and see how my opinions have changed or grown. And at the end of every anime I rewatch, there's a profound sense of nostalgia for what feels like an entirely different time of anime. The times have changed, but we should never forget that somehow No Game No Life was allowed to be that horny and somehow didn't get immediately renewed for a second season.